So it's lovely to be here to talk to you all today, and I'm going to, we can go, yeah, here we go. A little bit about the general sort of work that the Commission does. I'm sure everybody knows mostly what the Royal Commission does. To talk a little bit about that, to talk about some of our maritime work that we do specifically across Wales, and then to talk a little bit more about some of the ongoing work that we've done, are doing and are going to do perhaps within Dyfed. So please don't try and read all of this, particularly if you're at the back, but there's some sort of hints on here as to what we do as the Commission. We were established in 1908. We're based up in Aberystwyth, although as Judith said, I'm based down in St David's, thanks to the wonders of certainly post-COVID technology, I think. And our remit is really to ensure that I suppose at a basic level, that the National Monuments Record of Wales is up to date, as up to date as such a thing can ever be, while also undertaking recording work, surveying work. So it is not, certainly how I see the maritime stuff, it's not something that is set in stone. It changes and it evolves as our knowledge of these sites evolves. Also to reply to statutory questions relating to planning and these kinds of advice, and to try and offer guidance to the rest of the discipline within Wales. What that comprises in reality is about 120,000 sites that are geographically located, and about 50,000 sort of archive holdings that range from everything from aerial photographs to historic charts, architectural drawings, all kinds of things that you can explore, in some cases download, and certainly access in Aberystwyth via the Covlane platform. As you can see, the remit of this is very much beyond the land and goes out to this red dotted line in the middle of the Irish Sea, which I'll come back to in a little while. In terms of my job within the Commission, I'd sort of describe that as I'm the maritime archaeologist at the Commission, and I think it's quite easy a lot of the time to think that maritime archaeology involves shipwrecks, which it does. I spend a lot of my time, I'd say worrying, maybe thinking about them. I try not to worry about them too much. Shipwrecks, where they are or where we think they are, what remains of them we can see. But as we've heard, maritime archaeology is a lot more than that. We have this wonderful record of submerged prehistoric landscapes around Wales. This is down at Newgale Beach in Pembrokeshire, where there's a very long known forest. Gerald of Wales was writing about this submerged forest, but you don't see it very often. I was really lucky late 2021 this is to be able to record some of it down there and get a couple of dates of it. So this bit dates to sort of 4000 BC or so. And it's an area where it would be brilliant to be able to do the type of work that we've heard about sort of up in Ceredigion and that kind of thing. But it's yeah, it's an elusive thing, the submerged forest down at Newgale. So we have all of that within the Maritime Archaeological Record of Wales. We've got everything from these really, really early, amazing sites right the way through to the industrial period and into the sort of Second World War type of things, which you can summarise in this diagram on here. So everything right at the top in the coastal zone, maybe promontory forts, lime kilns, old quays, moving down the foreshore through fish traps, lighthouses on offshore islands, and right the way out through aircraft crash sites, submerged wrecks, and so on. And to put them into a bit more of a visual aid for you, all of those on the screen. Some of these sites you may be familiar with. Dinas Dintley Promontory Fort up in a bit further up Cardigan Bay than Aberystwyth. There's a really famous, or increasingly famous, I think, World War II aircraft at Harlech, P-38 Lightning, which is, I think, the first aeroplane in Britain to be scheduled as an ancient monument. So that's the kind of the range and the remit of what we would see as maritime archaeological site types. Our work within the Commission to record those is, I think, one of those bits of archaeology that has sort of changed out of sight. When I started working in the intertidal zone sort of 20-ish years ago, you would set off to site armed with an oversized drawing board, sort of trailing datum lines and tape measures behind you, getting tangled up in them. And everything was based on those kind of sort of offset survey works. Maybe there was a total station assist you. And now we have almost a squadron of aircraft in the sky with LiDAR, satellite imagery, drones to do a lot of our survey work, not for us, we're controlling them, but to take the photographs, to create some of the 3D models, some of which we've seen earlier, that allow us to work much, much quicker. It's possible to go out to a shipwreck site now and record the whole thing in, maybe an hour or so in huge detail to allow the interpretation of it afterwards. Whereas before it would have taken a squad of people a week to do that. And when your window of work on a site is maybe only an hour or an hour and a half, being able to collect that data so much faster allows us to get a lot further. Oh, the TV has got very upset with me and is going to turn off in 5 minutes.
Is it?
It is. That's my early 5-minute warning. Maybe it'll carry on. Okay. In terms of the National Monuments Record within Wales, those maritime sites are about 8,000 or so that are sort of, I'd describe them as being beyond or below the high water mark. I'm lucky, I think, in that there's more sea than land in Wales. That is your take-home fact for today, okay? So our remit goes right out to the middle of the Irish Sea, border with the Republic, England down here, Northern Ireland, the Isle of Man, and a bit more of England up to the north. And that comes about from the sort of the marine planning system that gives the Welsh Government jurisdiction over this patch of sea, that in turn somebody has to take responsibility for the archaeological remains that are in it. So that's what there is. We heard a little bit about Borth earlier. Here is a sort of a little overhead view of one of the amazing sets of submerged forest remains at Borth. Those intertidal and maritime sites, I suppose, around the country are about 6,000 shipwreck sites. I'm going to come back to those a little bit later. There's about 300 air crash sites in the Monuments Record that are sort of in the sea, most of which we don't know where they are. They've not been found yet. And then you come down through fish traps on the coast zone, historic harbours, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, places like Tenby, Porthgain, a place like this in Pembrokeshire, submerged forest remains and that kind of thing. So we're really blessed with the extent of the archaeology that we have within Wales that you would classify as maritime, I suppose. And then on the coast edge, a whole another world of stuff that relates to the sea, but which is situated very firmly on the land and represents that interface between the land and the sea, where people are arriving, doing things that I would say have a real maritime character. So we think about harbours and quays and port sites, but also much smaller industrial sites like lime kilns. We've heard a bit about promontory forts today. Most of the promontory fort sort of things have some kind of maritime connection, either because of where they are or what they were doing. And some of these sites are really well known, others amazingly we're still finding. So the image on the screen is of an old quay site that was certainly mapped by Lewis Morris in the middle of the 18th century, so it's on a chart of 1740 or so, but wasn't within any of the records that we hold, either at HCR, NMR or anything else, until a couple of years ago when we sort of went through a process of looking through old aerial photographs and then ground truthing a few of the things that we could see. And that sort of oversight is important because of the what happens within the marine planning system. So I call it marine planning. It's marine licensing really, but it's easier to refer to it as marine planning. So if you think about the work that Fran was just describing at the White store, there's a similar sort of process in play for work in the sea or under the sea or on the sea, that things have to take account of all kinds of different facets of the marine zone, including what are described as historic assets, so the archaeological and historical material. One of the roles of the Commission is to give statutory advice on that. So if somebody is laying a cable or building a wind farm, what is the impact of that going to be on archaeological material, and what needs to be done to prevent that impact from being too bad, if you want to think about it that way. So for the people at the back, this is called the snappily named Policy SOC 5. Okay, which basically is to do with things that are termed as historic assets. Okay, so it's not a very nice phrase, I don't think. it lacks a bit of romanticness, but effectively you could just think of all of those things as being a historic asset. And essentially what developers, whoever they may be, are asked to do is avoid impacting them, and if you can't do that, we'll minimise the impact, and if you can't do that, well, you need to mitigate what is going on, and ideally enhance our knowledge and understanding of what is happening. And generally that works quite well. I await the day when we specify that somebody needs to do a full excavation of a shipwreck in 20 metres of water 10 miles off the coast of North Wales, but so far that hasn't happened because the wind farm developers are very good at avoiding things in that bit of it. So last year, these stats will be updated in about a week's time, probably at the end of the reporting year. This encountered about sort of 60 of these sort of marine licence applications, which range geographically, you can see all around the country, and taking a whole range of different stuff from big, large-scale offshore wind farms, particularly down off the southwest at the moment, cables being brought ashore from Ireland and England, coastal defence work, coastal infrastructure work where railway lines are running along the coast and the sides of the tracks and stuff are being shored up, through to harbour dredging. All of that kind of stuff comes across our desk in terms of how do we respond to that and think about what we want the developers to do to safeguard the archaeological material. So what that means in some sense, I know Thomas is going to touch again on this, I'm sure later. A lot of our heritage is at risk in some way or another. We've heard a little bit about it already in terms of climate change stuff. There's posters in the room there about eroding, the impact of erosion on sites. The schemes that are being put in place to mitigate the impact of climate change have an effect on our archaeology. Some of those schemes are proactive in terms of building wind farms, and some of them are reactive in terms of coastal defence work. But all of it means that's the stuff, if you like, that we're really, really interested in and cherish is potentially, it is in the firing line, if you like. And that is a real challenge for how we sort of think about managing it, particularly in a world of ever-shrinking budgets. But I think to some extent, we also have to see that as an opportunity to sort of force us to go and be more proactive in recording this material so that we have a record of it before something happens to it. So within the Commission, a couple of years ago, I sort of began to try and think about how do we do that process within Wales. Is it possible to, get around everything, if you like, that's within the intertidal zone? That's my sort of remit area, if you like. And if you're prepared to think in the longer term, which isn't, doesn't always happen, then yeah, it is a feasible amount of stuff to do. So we now have a sort of a strategic aim, if you like, to try and record or survey everything, either ourselves or in partnership with other people, or to see that it's done, in the course of that marine licensing work. This kind of falls into some main groups that you could knock off of shipwrecks, harbour sites, submerged forest remains, fish traps and so on, but also some of the other amazing things in the intertidal zone. So this is Whitford Point Lighthouse, just sort of slightly out of the Dyfed area, although it is owned by Carmarthenshire County Council, even though it's on the Gower, for arcane reasons dating back to the middle of the 20th century. I was really fortunate actually. I was out there last August creating a record of that, because it's getting very undercut at the base of it here from erosion. This plinth that it's on is falling to bits, and to begin to start monitoring actually systematically what is happening to that. And this, we talk about sites being quite rare. There are only 2 of these lighthouses on the planet, sort of fully iron-built lighthouses that are covered by the sea every day. And it's an amazing structure. It's a really beautiful structure, and it's all a bit neglected and forgotten out there. But what to do with it is definitely not part of my job. I just go and record it. Back to the sort of the Iron Age. One of the things we did last year was recording Castle Coch Promontory Fort in Pembrokeshire. There's a poster in the room about the sort of the shoreline management plan work that the trusts are being commissioned by CADU to do, and this is sort of running alongside that, the Commission's work in this. This is one of the many, many promontory forts around Pembrokeshire that in November 2022, excuse me, underwent quite a large bit of erosion and a landslip in this kind of area, which you can see in those photos. That it seems like a long time, taking a year to go and do something, but I think in archaeological terms that's quite swift as a response to something. So we were able to program in to go back there to undertake a UAV survey, so a drone survey. Basically, this is the overhead image that comes from that, with just the sort of the survey markers on there. The sea does not do well in photogrammetry. Water is not one of those surfaces, because it changes all the time, that records very well, which occasionally for me, working on a beach on sites full of water, can be a problem. But in this case, what we were interested in was the land bit of it. So all those little dots on the screen are the photographs taken by the drone, which allows us to compare effectively one of Toby Driver's aerial photographs from 2017 with the same kind of view of the promontory now, and you've got that big area of slippage shows up really, really well. That is it in a bit more detail in terms of the model of it, and it's a big area of this fort that is going to fall off even more at some point. And I think, you know, this is an increasing problem on a lot of these sites all around the country, either through erosion or increasing rainfall, which is sort of filling the soil, if you like, in terms of the amount of water in it. This kind of survey is not the solution to the problem, but it at least allows us to monitor what's happening and say objectively there is more of this happening or less of it happening, and so on. This slightly garish image is a digital elevation model of that site, and allows us to go back again and again. We could go back in a year's time or 5 years' time and begin to understand what's happening there really, really clearly. Another bit of work in the sort of wider ranging scope that we've done in the last few years is between myself and my colleague Louise Barker, which is to look at coastal lime kilns around the whole of Wales eventually, but sort of starting again in Ceredigion and Pembrokeshire, where they are a really, really numerous monument type. They're probably, after a shipwreck, I think I probably am most fondest of a lime kiln out of everything that I get to work in. I'm not really sure why. I think I grew up sort of seeing them all the time, and they represent this kind of, you know, interface of land and sea on a really small scale. This is like the ordinary stuff that was happening in the 18th and 19th century, of people bringing in limestone and coal to tiny little places where you wouldn't really imagine you could put a ship, unloading it, creating the lime, spreading it on the fields, using it for construction work. That's sort of cross-section based on, I think I based that one on, that is actually this one here in sort of cross-section to get across an understanding of what was happening with that. And a fairly unpleasant job, actually, shoveling hot lime that would burn your skin, and apparently you had to be smeared in butter to mitigate the impacts of this. And I wouldn't like to have been a lime burner, but I quite like surveying lime kilns. So we started looking at those using the first edition Ordnance Survey map as a kind of a baseline in the late 1880s, early 1890s, at a point in time when either lots of them were still in use, or if they'd fallen out of use, were certainly still there and were mapped by the Ordnance Survey. So the first sort of phase of that was just the dots on the map of what we've got records of. This picked up about 111 of these between the Dyfed and Skomer. And then we sort of started to realise that actually we only had about 48% of these within the National Monuments record. And then we started working out which ones we thought might still be there. And about 60% of those have been lost since the sort of 1880s, 1890s, either through they've been deliberately knocked down, you know, back then and have been reused. The stonework has been reused. Some of them have fallen into the sea and are lumps of stone on the beach nowadays. Others are just in a state of disrepair, even though they're scheduled, listed, sometimes both, owned by people, but are sort of overtaken by vegetation, tree roots, this kind of thing. So that has, I suppose, spurred us on, and again, in conjunction with the Shoreline Management Plan project, to start to sort of go out and assess these a bit more, particularly the ones where we think there might be one or was one, to ascertain, is it there, is it not there? And to start doing some recording work on those. So we've sort of started again on that northern stretch of coast between St David's Head and the Dyfed, visiting sites, recording them, and then where we need to do more work. So this is the one on the screen is down at Aberystwyth in North Pembrokeshire, which I was down on Tuesday morning doing this. There was a rare gap in the wind and it wasn't blowing a gale for once. So I was able to get down there and do a drone survey of this. And for reference, the coast edge is there. So this is the top of the beach where the waves get to a high tide. That is 4 metres away from the lime kiln. 10 years ago, that was 25 metres away. A lot of that is being caused by the sort of the collapse of the sea defence at Aberystwyth. And if you look at the old photos, the car park is about half the size that it used to be. But realistically, you could expect that in maybe another 10 years, that lime kiln won't be there. So it's important to both understand the speed at which this is happening and to have some kind of record of this structure so that when it is gone, we at least know what it was like when it was there. And then the last bit, I suppose, is to get across some of the work that we do on shipwreck research and survey work, which some of you may recognise this site. It's just down the road on Kevin Sidan Sands. So within Wales, there's about just over 6,000 shipwreck records. A lot of those we don't know where they are, sadly. There's about 1,042, it says on there. It's about 1,060 now because I keep adding ones from other sources, where we know there's a thing on the seabed. So we know there is a shipwreck either on the beach or on the seabed. And then there's a whole load of documented losses where we know things have sunk, but it's never been found. And some of these are quite accurate and you'd think you'd be able to find it, but nobody has. And others are mostly unhelpful. I mean, it might just say a ship was lost off Anglesey in 1460, and that's your clue to, you know, somewhere out there is a medieval ship. But that's the kind of the extent of what we know about. Alongside that is a whole database of work held by the UK Hydrographic Office, who have responsibility for navigational charting of the seafloor, producing the charts that are used for navigation, and have a really sort of ongoing proactive survey programme, including around the Welsh coast. So that their dots on the map are there. The purple ones are ones they don't think are there anymore. Sometimes the ones that they describe as being a dead wreck, they return to it a few years later and it's reappeared and it's been found. But I suppose the thing to take from that slide is that they've found about 120 new wrecks around the Welsh coast in the last 3 or 4 years. Because of the improvements in survey technology that we have, the ability to do things in more detail over bigger areas, or simply the fact that, you know, this bit here, you think, oh, there's no shipwrecks in Cardigan Bay, that's strange. But it's just because nobody's surveyed it for quite a long time. I think the last time it was done was possibly with a lump of lead on the end of a rope. Whereas the modern work, say off Strumble Head, will produce you something like this, a really, really detailed image of a ship. And that is one that was found in 2020. So that's in 20 odd metres of water. It's a 43 metre long ship that is a new thing, if you like, into the National Monuments Record. One of the sort of the challenges of, I suppose, my post within the Commission is sort of, I'm not saying it's making these two things consistent. It's almost like forcing them together, these two data sets, to incorporate the Hydrographic Office survey into our own records, and to ensure that the historic environment record is as up to date as it can be, so that when somebody comes and builds a wind farm or lays a cable, they are served by the best information as to the significance archaeologically of those sites. So if the UKHO could sort of stop for a few years surveying things and finding new wrecks, I could catch up with them. But it's getting there. Eventually that map on the right will only have green dots on it. So the yellow ones and the blue ones go green eventually when you get them in the same place, and you catch up with the sort of the backlog of this. So that's the kind of the background to the oversight of it. But the work the Commission does also involves the sort of the proactive survey of these vessels, and I think anyone who's from the locality here down the road at Kevin Sidan, you have, I mean, one of the most amazing collections of shipwrecks on beaches that you will ever come across anywhere in Britain. You've got about 16 wrecks, there's probably more, along a 12-kilometre sort of set of beach. This is one of them. This is sort of the biggest one you come to when you come out of the car parks and turn right along the beach. This is a really, really big wooden ship, 52 metres in length. So assuming there's a bit more of it, this is a big wooden ship by the standards of wooden ships. This is really big. I'm pretty sure this is the biggest sort of wooden intertidal wreck in Wales. It's probably one of the biggest in the UK. I've been down and surveyed it a couple of times now. I still don't know what it is. If anybody does know, I'd be delighted to hear. I've sort of got it down in the historical material to a couple of candidates, one of which we know lots about, a ship called the Australia, but actually I think that sank a bit further to the west. And another one, frustratingly, is one of those ones we don't really know much about it because it was an Italian ship that's known to have sunk 6 miles northwest of Bury Port. And these sinking locations are really vague sometimes, because the other one, which is 4 miles west of Ferryside, that's about 4 miles inland into Carmarthenshire. So they kind of imagine space in 4 miles west is straight down the river, basically, but that's kind of the southwest. So you have to take a lot of these things with a pinch of salt. How that changes over time, that site. This is 2 images in sort of 6 months apart, basically, and it's all a lot more scoured out in the second image, so more material is being on show, so it's more likely to get degraded. And we think a lot about storm action uncovering these ships, which I think it does. But then one of the things that happens after that, I'm sort of getting more interested in, is the impact of rainfall, particularly on big beaches like this. And I was there in late October, I think in the heaviest rain I've ever been outside in, watching sort of torrents of this stuff run down the beach, pulling sediment with it, collecting into these lower depression areas where the ships are, and then moving more sediment off down the beach. So we think a lot about storms exposing these, but on big flat beaches like that, I think really, really, really torrentially heavy rainfall has as much a part in that. The site's really interesting. So that's the keel of it down the middle, and the whole of this side has actually come apart and like fallen outwards, basically, which is why when you look at it, it looks like there's kind of 3 lines of framing timbers on it. So there is a huge amount of that ship still preserved. We think about it as being quite fragmented and just the ribs of it sticking up. But if you could suck away all that sand, you'd find, an awful lot of wooden structure. That amount of wooden structure would be sort of my nightmare scenario, like the White stories to a burial site, I suppose. This is another one a bit further down the beach, quite a different site, a bit smaller. Could be lots and lots of different things. Maybe it's a brig called the Daisy that was lost in 1877. Really characteristic, though, because there's lots of these frame timbers sticking up above the site, but also quite easy to get a fairly accurate idea from one end of it to the other, down the middle. Another one, though, that was really sort of scoured out in a 6-month period. And to give you an idea, these little bits here that you can see sticking out are the cross beams that would have carried the deck of that ship. So this is pretty much a whole ship that's buried, certainly up to the lower deck. Most of these ships, trading ships, only had one kind of deck in them when they were this kind of size. So if you could, again, imagine this gone, you've probably got the whole of the lower, certainly the lower half, maybe a bit more of that of a wooden ship in there. This was the site when I was there in October. You can get an idea of the runoff of the water into it. And also, if we think that the 2 things that are not good for photogrammetry of using photographs to create these 3D models are reflective surfaces and water, along with lots of dark shadows, you can get an idea of the difficulty on that particular day after an enormous cloudburst of recording that site, which managed to do it. So we've got a record of that site at that point in time. And the other thing you can see on the top there are just a small set of samples of some brass bolts, which were in the bow of that ship, which are really useful for dating, because people only started using brass on ships from about the 1840s or so. And it's possible to do, they're away in Oxford University at the moment having some metallurgical analysis done on them, and to look at the impurities in those to get a better idea of which bit of the 19th century those were made. And you can do the same with copper, which only starts getting used from the 1780s, but you can pin down the sort of the production date of it to within 10 or 15 years or so through the impurities, which is really useful for pulling out which of the sort of the historical losses these ships relate to, basically. Right, I realise I'm keeping you from your tea break. So I'm very happy to take questions during the tea break. If anybody knows the identification of the ships on Kevin's Sin, I'd love to hear. And in the theme of the day, here are some more QR codes to some more 3D models to keep you busy.